This is the city. Los Angeles, California.
This building in downtown Los Angeles stands empty and ignored. Its location and architecture easily identify it as one of many buildings which were left behind as the size, shape, and condition of the city changed. Cornices high above give an indication of the purpose and importance it once had. Worked into the design, the letters P.E. Those walking by don't even hesitate, let alone stop, as they pass the large opening onto Main Street. If they even notice the brass inlay on the sidewalk on either side of the large opening, they do not have a clue as to what the danger might be. For half a century, 40-ton interurban rail cars emerged one after the other, rolling out of the building and onto Main Street. In the rear, trains left from platforms and rolled out across elevated tracks to avoid the heavy traffic at street level, where other departing cars had to muscle their way along until they reached private right-of-way. This was the Pacific Electric's 6th and Main Street station. Here, more than any other place, you could feel the pulse of Southern California, sense its size and its tempo as trains rolled out every few minutes.
There were Pasadena Short Line, Pasadena Oak Knoll, Sierra Madre, Glendora, Alhambra, San Bernardino, Pomona, Covina, Baldwin Park.
Long Beach, San Pedro, Santa Ana, Watts Line, and the Catalina steamship special trains. And the elevated terminal in the back of the building, every track was full of cars, 2- and 3-car trains leaving for Watts and San Pedro, and they left at very frequent intervals, and they were just all packed.
Below the elevated tracks were other Pacific Electric offices
that handled baggage, railway express, and package freight. And we even had railway post office cars, just the same as the railroads had those railway post office cars. They had a couple of mail clerks on there that were sorting mail right on the PE going around.
Around in front, several thousand passengers pass through the Main Street doors every day.
I remember myself going in there in the rush hour, and it was just a beehive of activity.
It was always walking crowds. There was very little waiting in that, because you would just walk into the building, walk through the turnstile, the gate, buy your ticket, and then just walk down and get on the platform. And when generally there was a train waiting there, so it was a moving crowd all the time. There wasn't a large volume of people just standing around and waiting.
There would be people buying tickets and asking information and timetables, and they had a restaurant. And in fact, we'd have a discussion of, shall we go over to the restaurant? Shall we go to the PE club? Or go to Harry Cole's? And I'd always vote for Harry Cole's.
Harry Cole's is still there, having outlived the Pacific Electric and the man who conceived it. Henry Huntington was building an empire, and he needed a centerpiece for that empire. He bought a large parcel of land at 6th and Main, and in 1902 began excavation on what would be the tallest building in Los Angeles.
The Huntington building was certainly a statement. It was daring because it was built at that time. It was in a suburban area, a residential area. It was a daring move. You're leaving the business district and you're going out here in the Tules and building this huge office building. But he was also saying, this is also a monument to my faith in the growth of Southern California and the growth of the city of Los Angeles.
Not far away stood the Southern Pacific's Arcade Depot. It had been built 10 years earlier, a declaration of the company's intention to dominate rail traffic in Southern California. But steam trains could not compete with electric interurban cars. The heavy maintenance and labor required to keep them running placed financial limitations on how they were used, 2 or 3 trains a day with limited stops. Passengers were expected to adjust their schedules accordingly.
Remember, the electric cars carry you when you're ready to go and bring you back when you're ready to return. Why waste time waiting for the steam trains when you can take an electric car from any cross street every 15 minutes? Pacific Electric Advertisement, 1902.
Articles of incorporation and consolidation made and executed on this 24th day of August 1911 by and between the Pacific Electric Railway Company, the Los Angeles Interurban Railway Company.
It was called the Great Merger. The Southern Pacific combined the Huntington Rail properties and the Sherman and Clark lines into one system. Overnight, Southern California gained the largest mass transit network in the world.
The name of said new and consolidated corporation shall be the Pacific Electric Company.
This would be the Pacific Electric of legend, serving 4 counties, climbing into 2 mountain ranges, running along 60 miles of coastline, and binding together more than 50 communities. It would dominate the commuter culture it had created in Southern California for a while. The tracks of the Pacific Electric? In 1940, they did not seem like the future. Most transit planners across the country agreed. Unless something happened, the fate of interurban rail was clear.
World War II came along, and they put a stop to the scrapping of all equipment. Everything was recycled, and cars were taken out of junkyards and resurrected and ran all through the war, and they were maintained to just keep them running on what we call an RTF, run till failure.
The Pacific Electric's ridership zoomed past even the peak years of the mid-20s. During the war, it was carrying 180 million passengers a year. As in the early days of the system, many of these were new arrivals, this time drawn by work in shipyards and factories.
When they were short of equipment, Southern Pacific steam locomotives were seen pulling trains with a Pacific Electric locomotive right behind it.
Besides moving record numbers of people, the PE hauled millions of tons of freight. Its 4-track southern corridor to the harbor saw trains passing every few seconds. Any and all forms of traction power were pressed into service by the system in order to accommodate demands.
Highest traffic densities in the history of the PE, making money hand over fist, and very profitable. And nobody thought that when the war ended, this might stop.
The Pacific Electric settled back into its familiar routine after the war and carried a record number of people to the 1946 Rose Parade. It seemed like old times, and ridership did remain strong for a while as servicemen returned home and those who came to Southern California for work decided to stay.
And then came 1950. PE was faced with declining ridership, and the equipment, everything was shot. Everything needed to be refurbished. The Venice Short Line, all the tracks on that Venice line, which was a very heavily traveled line, right up to its last day. The rail was already 50 years old. It dated from the 1900. The cars were 43 years old. It needed to be rebuilt.
This film was produced for you, the people who pay for and use the state highways. Since the opening of the Pasadena Parkway,
the Arroyo Seco had not been forgotten by highway planners. The Pacific Electric's view was that it could become a part of the proposed freeway system. In many ways, it already was. This was the Cahuenga Pass in 1910, the year Pacific Electric engineers cut a right-of-way through the hills, opening the first major corridor between Los Angeles and the San Fernando Valley. 10 years later, a 2-lane road clings to PE's right-of-way through the pass. Fast forward to the late 40s, and the Hollywood Parkway, with the Pacific Electric's 1910 right-of-way now sandwiched between 6 lanes of concrete and asphalt. These Highway Department films usually avoided showing the red cars. You can glimpse one there, heading toward Highland Avenue in Hollywood. The Pacific Electric considered the Cahuenga Pass, now the Hollywood Parkway, to be a model for new freeway construction, and proposed that the extension of the parkway continue the double tracks right through to downtown LA. PE's president, O.A. Smith, predicted that rail lines could cut rush hour traffic volume in half, and, if successful, could be applied to the entire freeway system. Traffic? What traffic? Traffic was something that happened on the streets downtown, which, by the way, was made worse by the lumbering red cars. In some cases, made disastrous by the heavy interurbans. This was the answer to traffic problems. This was the so-called rush hour on what would soon be the Hollywood Freeway. This was the rush hour on the Ramona Parkway, 5:10 in the afternoon, on what would soon be the San Bernardino Freeway. Whoops, the camera caught a red car traveling along what used to be its right-of-way. Don't want to show that in a Department of Highways movie. And another thing the Highway Department didn't want was any part of the $20 million price tag for putting tracks in the center of the Hollywood Freeway. Neither did the taxpayers.
The PE, it was still a private company. This is a private business. And here, I'm going to take my tax dollar and you're going to put it in the pocket of somebody that operates a transit system?
Rose Parade too, oh God. Every damn car that would run went to the Rose Parade.
New Year's Day, they would start running about 4:30 in the morning from Los Angeles. And by 7:45, the bulk of the rush was over, so a little over 3 hours. But they would handle, the morning report, they would handle 39 or 40,000 people. It was really pretty good service and compared to what's available now.
On January 1st, 1950, the PE still had 500 interurban cars, about 800 miles of track, and certainly 17 rail lines. All this was in place on January the 1st, 1950. 10 years later, January the 1st, 1960, one line was left.